everyone, and welcome to our Monday, November the 8th edition of Track Announcer's Notebook. We just keep trucking along like the Energizer Bunny. Started this 1-hour webcast back in May 2020. So we've been going at it a while, Stuart, but I think we're all happy to see that COVID-19 is getting a little bit further, seems like each week in the rearview mirror, and things have certainly opened up, and things are looking much more promising than they were a year ago. Our special guests tonight are the dynamic duo that were behind Jake Gagne's amazing 2021 Moto America Superbike Championship. We'll have a conversation with Jonathan Cornwell and Darin Marshall, but as always, first up on Track Announcer's Notebook, Nodell's Notes. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And just wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions or comments to share, or for both Jonathan and Darin, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them as soon as possible. And to kick things off, Pat, this past weekend was the penultimate round of the MotoGP World Championship, and 16-year-old sensation Pedro Acosta clinched the Moto3 World Championship in what was a really exciting race.
Yeah, indeed. I think Acosta had a little bit of a slump there, but he was very quick at the Portuguese event. I visited that track a couple of years ago. Wonderful facility, and it looks like it's going to become a fixture on the MotoGP series. But 16 years of age, Acosta is an incredible talent, and I don't think it'll be more than a year or two, and we're going to see him in MotoGP. Jonathan, you're pretty connected to the road racing world. What are your thoughts on Acosta's Moto3 championship? 1 year, 2 years in Moto2? How soon will we see this rider in MotoGP?
That's a good question. Right now, you see they're actually bypassing Moto2 and jumping straight from Moto3 into MotoGP. I'm not sure what's going to happen with this kid. Right now, Red Bull and KTM have everyone locked up pretty tight on contracts. So even if there was another factory that was interested in trying to talk to Pedro, they're going to have to go through KTM. And as we've seen with the Raul Fernandez fiasco, if you want to call it that, there's not a whole lot of room that you have to move. Once you get tied in with the Red Bull thing, it's pretty tight. It's really hard to get and branch out unless they want to let you go for whatever reasons they have. If they don't have a spot for you, or if they don't think that you're quite going to fit into their organization. But they have an embarrassment of riches as far as how many riders they have to select from. And as we see with Iker Lecuona, I think that they're pretty quick, and too quick in some cases, to let someone go, if you want to call it that, when you really actually need at least 3 years in MotoGP to understand everything. If you don't perform right away, it seems like I don't know. I get really kind of depressed because I see some of these kids that don't get an opportunity, and then they end up slipping through your fingers, and you end up you wonder, well, what could have been if they'd have gotten into a different situation. And it's a little bit like the Jake Gagne thing that we went through this year with him. And I talked to him a lot. I also talked to Cam Beaubier about his experiences with, being part of the Red Bull thing. And it's, it's got its pluses, but it's also got some pretty huge downsides. If you don't actually get picked up, or you're not a favorite, you end up sort of on the outside looking in.
Do you think it's a mistake, Acosta going from Moto3 to MotoGP? Do you think a year in terms of building his confidence and his skill, a year in Moto2 may have been the better career move?
I'm not sure, because you're going from Dunlop tires to Michelin, and then you're also going from a motorcycle that has very limited electronics and going to produce some bad riding habits, which we've seen. And it's difficult to say which way is better, which direction. I think my feeling is that the Jack Miller scenario, where they actually gave him 3 years on a MotoGP bike so that he could learn the tracks on a MotoGP bike, he could figure out the tires, he figured out who he was racing with. And then, you know, for whatever reason, Honda decided that he wasn't going to fit in with their particular, you know, moving forward, and Ducati snatched him up. And, you know, he's been a good acquisition for Ducati. Maybe he's not a Pecco Bagnaia, but I tell you, that guy brings a lot to the table in terms of being able to help develop the motorcycle. He's got a lot of experience on, you know, the Honda, like I said, and various ways of working around problems, because he's had that breadth of experience. And if you're going to take a kid like Pedro, you need to give him at least 3 years and invest in it, and then it will start to pay off.
Okay, Stuart?
Yeah, and then in other news, Pat, Moto America has announced the rule changes that they're proposing for the 2022 Moto America Supersport Championship. And from what I gather, it looks very much like the World Supersport Championship spec rules. And I think a lot of it will play in the favor of the Daytona 200 by encouraging some of the other manufacturers to get involved. And maybe we'll see a bit of an international flair back with that race.
Well, I think one of the hopes for Wayne Rainey and the whole Moto America crew is that by taking over the Daytona 200 and allowing some of these additional motorcycles and brands, that they would get a much stronger international contingent coming to the Daytona 200. Jonathan, any chance, or have you had any discussion at all, even if it was a one-off of having a Yamaha for Jake Gagne, because he did win sport bike championships? He's, you know, very quick on a 600 sport bike / super sport machine. Any thoughts about running Jake in the Daytona 200?
Sure. We've had some discussions about it. Richard Stamboli and I have been discussing it. We've been looking at the rules, been looking at what, you know, is going to be available, what kind of modifications we can make that's going to keep the R6 competitive in that class. I'd like to add that bringing in the other manufacturers is essential to keep the growth of the 600 Super Sport classes. I don't know if they're going to call it that or just going to call it the Super Sport class, but you need to, you know, embrace the idea that the R6s and the CBR 600, which is obviously not there anymore, and the Kawasaki, and what else have you got? You've got the Triumph and you've got the MV Agusta, but you need to bring in some of the other manufacturers, and also you need a feeder for the Superbike class. And who knows, you know, the kids that ride these bikes, if somebody shows enough potential, it's possible that they could go even further than just going to Superbike. And I think it's important, and I'm all for it. The balance of performance is going to be something that's going to be difficult, I think, in the first little bit. But yeah, I think it's going to be a fun deal to come down there to Daytona to see what everybody brings.
Indeed. When do you think that decision might be made as to Jake running in the 200? Because as I said prior to us going on, when I was there in October, you know, Danny Eslick was there, and the M4 X-Star Suzuki squad with Sam Lockoff. I assume that he is their rider for Daytona. And I don't know about Sean Dillon Kelly, who's pictured there on the screen. I know he's got his ride over in Moto 2, but do they look at a one-off ride for Sean Dillon Kelly, who's come so close so often in winning that Daytona 200?
You never know. I think that we'll know a lot more when we see the entry list, Pat. It's hard to say right now. There's lots of chatter in the background from various people. You know, Ducati's definitely going to come with someone, I'm sure. You saw the Triumph with Danny Eslick. He's already won the 200 on a Triumph. And so, yeah, I'm, like I said, I'm excited to actually see what's going to happen. It should be a fun deal.
Indeed. Stuart?
Yeah, I'll continue here, Pat. And just our friend of the show, Carl Soltheis, was posting some photos, Pat. And I know he's well known for doing this Superman riding position across the checkered flag. And I found this, so I thought I'd share it with everyone that got to see Carl on with us a couple weeks back. I don't know that I'd want to be riding in that position at Daytona, but I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was there. I announced the finish. I couldn't believe it when I saw it as he came up to the line. It was one of the races that he won on the weekend. I'm not sure. I guess the race officials were okay with it, but again, there's always a fine line between showmanship and being as entertaining as possible, and you know, putting this stuff up on social media, and then you know, the question of safety.
And then I'll just quickly go through some of the scheduling, Pat. I don't want to necessarily go too much into any conflict since we have both Jonathan and Darren joining us tonight. I'm sure you guys want to get into that conversation, but the SOAR Regional Series had announced their schedule back a couple weeks ago. And there really only seems to be a couple of minor conflicts at this point, but CSBK and the Pro 6 folks are going to announce their schedules later this week, I'm told.
Well, certainly without the compressed season like we had this year, we can avoid conflicts. The only one I see, you know, right off the bat is that September 10-11 weekend where both SOAR and the Super Series are running, but those two series sort of attract their own regional group of riders, and I don't think it'll be a big deal. And now that all the regional series are out, including VRRA, now it'll be up to Colin Fraser to put his schedule together. And Darin Marshall, hopefully we're back at Atlantic Motorsport Park in Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia sometime in the summer when that CSBK schedule comes out. Have you heard any rumors as to what weekend that might be?
Yeah, it's looking like it's going to be the third or fourth weekend of July.
All righty. Okay, we will wait for the official CSBK schedule, which as Stuart indicated, should be coming out in the next, 2-3 weeks, Stuart?
Yeah, actually, when I was speaking to Sheena Noche this afternoon, she said later this week even we could see it as early as, so maybe by next week, worst case. And then I thought it was of note that the big vintage crown jewel event at CTMP so far for August 5th to 7th is wide open. There's no conflict, so hopefully that continues. Maybe CSBK follows the week after, and you have that sort of bike racing week-long festival, which seems to work really well.
And of course, for the VRRA guys and ladies, I think many of them are going to be looking at Daytona for January 7, 8, 9. Of course, they really haven't been able to go across the border the last couple of years to take part in any of the ARMA or USCRA races, and wouldn't be surprised to see some of our top vintage racers at that ARMA event that they're going to run at Daytona in early January.
And that's a wrap.
Pat.
All the news and notes I have, so I'll let you guys get into it, and I'll get out of your way.
All righty. Again, make as much use of the Q&A if you've got a question or a comment for Darin Marshall or Jonathan Cornwell. Please go to the Q&A and Stuart will address your question or comment as we go through the next 45 minutes or so. Darin Marshall, any comments on what Jonathan talked about during Nodell's notes, because whether it was MotoGP or Daytona, you're the data acquisition guy. With these new super sport rules, how do you equalize the performance when you're dealing with different number of cylinders, different displacements, and all these super sport machines that are going to be running in the Daytona 200?
CORNDOG alluded to it. I think it's going to be very difficult to get a comprehensive way of doing that, because you don't even know what's going to be available on the machines to even control the torque outputs on them. So, you know, sometimes they talk about rev limits, but in some cases, you know, that may not be enough to be able to equalize it. You know, you're not going to have a lot of access to a lot of the electronic controls, engine management controls. Then if you have to try to get into actual physical engine characteristics and building of engines, now you start to increase cost, and you know, the people that have the better skill of building it, you're always going to be chasing, trying to get that balance. There's going to be such a huge diversity. It's not like you're just trying to balance out a 600 and a 636. Now you're trying to balance out a 955 twin with, you know, probably, you know, 70 to 75 foot-pound of torque against a 636 that has probably 62. Even rev limits, like I say, it's not going to be the be all end all there. So it's going to be an interesting challenge for them. But unfortunately, there isn't a choice. You know, the number of inline 4-cylinder 600 is going away, and they need to do something to be able to, like CORNDOG mentioned, to be able to bring both a feeder class and just something else for people that, you know, maybe don't want to go directly to 1000s. And it's still a very large market, you know, for all the non-1000 bikes out there. So it's a good place for the manufacturer to come. Just have to figure out how to make it work. It's going to be difficult.
Jonathan, we briefly talked about Jake Gagne possibly on a Yamaha for the Daytona 200. What would that bike be? Because as I understand it, they're not building the R6 street version that's street legal in the US anymore. Is that a different motorcycle? What would the basis be for Jake's bike if you guys did put an entry in the 200?
So Richard had the opportunity to buy 14 R6s from 2021.
Okay.
Yamaha gave him the opportunity to purchase them and build purpose-built race bikes, kit bikes, basically. They're already doing something along those lines with YART in Austria. They built 50 of these kit bikes and made them available for track day riders and also for national series. And Richard wants to do the same thing. And this is a way for him to showcase, you know, his product with Jake at the 200. Plus, Richard also has an undying devotion and love for the 200 on his own. He just loves that event. It's a lot of fun for him to go there. So, you know, it's going to be an R6. It's just going to be a 2021 R6.
All right. Well, we really look forward to all the news and announcements that are going to come up over the next 3 months or so, leading up to the Daytona 200 in terms of teams, not only, you know, from the United States, like a Jake Gagne entry, but you've got Eslick on the Triumph, back to the Triumph that he won his first of 4 races on. And, you know, they're serious. They were there the entire weekend shaking things down. And I think it's going to be a great race. And of course, it is the milestone 80th coming up on March the 12th. Darin and Jonathan, let's go back to April, Rome, Atlanta, where the championship season didn't get off to the start. I think Jake, yourself, and the entire team were hoping for that DNF in race 1. At the end of that first race, I don't think you would have believed me if I told you, well, that's not how the rest of the season's going to go. You guys are going to win 16 races in a row and 17 of the next 19 races. Where was everybody at the end of that first race and the DNF, and looking forward to bouncing back as you did by winning race number 2.
You want me to answer that, Darren, or do you want to?
Yeah, no,
Darren was sitting in Nova Scotia. You were right there on the firing lines at Road Atlanta. What? Take us through that whole weekend for me. The downs
the phone,
to the ups.
the phone lines and the data lines were pretty hot after that. So it was pretty. I was there as virtually as I could be, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say at the end of it, we were pretty quickly able to diagnose what we thought the situation was and what caused it. You know, hindsight being what it is, looking at that. But some of the stuff we had gone through in testing and what we were working with for the spec for 2021, combined with you know, the approach, and as we've gone through testing for all the strategies with the electronics, ended up being that you know, over the race weekend, and then with a combination of a little bit of a you know, not necessarily a sensor failure, but just some sensor issues, all combined into a perfect storm that the engine, you know, couldn't survive in that situation. But we were able to figure out pretty quickly what the cause of failure was, and then so we were quite confident, you know, for Sunday. We weren't really concerned that it was going to recur. And then following that, we did a little more of a deep dive to get more of a what would you call
Broader
it?
picture.
A broader picture of a solution, a stronger solution for the year. You know, we had made some changes for Sunday race, but then we went back and had a better approach for the rest of the year that we weren't have to worry about. And you know, for the next couple of rounds, we continued to keep a close look on it. And then by the time Virginia was done, we were you know, pretty much good there. And then some of the things that we've been talking about for next year is revisiting a little bit of that, just to try to regain a little bit of the advantage that we had to give back, just because everybody else will be working hard through the winter, I expect. So we got to continue to try to develop for this year as well.
Jonathan, how about your take on that Road Atlanta weekend?
It actually started in the qualifying. So when Jake actually lost the front in turn 10B and ended up, you know, wrecking the bike, and we had a pretty big push that evening to try to get everything back together in time for the next day. And that also put him on the back foot as far as where he started. So he was a little bit, you know, not quite as confident right away. And then we had the engine failure in the first race. Jake was fine with that because it wasn't a rider issue or a chassis or a motorcycle issue. It was something that we could fix because it was, you know, an engine. We just had to, you know, we had spare engines upstairs. We just went up and grabbed one and came back down. And as Darren said, you know, went in and looked at the diagnostics on the electronics, discovered a few things that put us on the back foot with that particular engine configuration. But the engine that we put in was closer to the spec that we ran all 2020. So we knew it was a safe engine, safe build, safe power, safe everything. And it had, you know, an impeccable record as far as reliability went the previous year. So we were confident with that. I guess the thing is that for Jake was to understand where and how he was going to make his way to the front. And he quite quickly realized that he had pace. He kind of knew it from, you know, pre-practice and qualifying and stuff, that he had pace on everybody. But it's a different deal when you're in the races. And when he was in the race and he was able to make the passes as cleanly and as effectively as he was, that actually calmed him down quite a bit. And he, you know, he brought the thing home and got his first win for the season. And that actually took a lot of pressure off of all of us back in the pits, because we weren't concerned, because like I said, we knew that engine configuration had passed the test the previous years of reliability. So it wasn't a big concern. It's just you always know. And when your guy gets out on the racetrack the unexpected can happen and often does. So by you're holding your breath in a lot of cases, and by the end of it, you take a deep sigh of relief and realize, okay, this is the first of 19 more.
Yeah, long season, 20 races. Stuart and Odell, I think we've got some questions or comments for Darren and Jonathan.
Yeah, we do, Pat. I'll go through them first. And the first question is, do you think that weight alone, plus or minus, would equalize the 600 class next year, or super sport class, however they're going to phrase it?
I don't think so.
I'm with Darren on that one. It's not going to be just as simple as, oh, we're going to throw another 20 kilos on that bike or whatever. They've shown that before. You can throw weight out of a motorcycle, but at the end of the day, the team, their engineers, everybody figures out where to put the weight so that it actually doesn't really affect the performance of the motorcycle. And in some cases, we found that putting weight in certain places actually enhances the motorcycle's capabilities. To go back to that, balance of performance thing, I know Scott Smart pretty well, and they've actually been working pretty hard in the BSB series with the Triumph already, trying to, find out what kind of hiccups they're going to run into. Of course, the Ducati hasn't been in that class yet, and that 955V twin, that's going to be sort of the one that everybody's going to be kind of looking at going, okay, that thing's going to make 150 horsepower. So how are you going to, come up against with an R6 or even a 636? I think the best 636 I've heard of is 130, 131. Yeah. So yeah, where do you start? How do you equalize that? I don't think it's as simple as just one thing. I think you have to kind of let the first couple, 3 races kind of work through that and see what happens. I know Ollie Bayliss has signed on with Barney Racing over there to ride that super sport bike, and they've got one other rider came from Moto 2. So Ducati's going to have a full factory effort there. That full factory effort is going to be the one that everybody looks at and says, okay, how are we going to make this so that it's equitable for everyone? And hopefully there's going to be some testing done prior to us having to get full bore into our racing season, and we might have some answers to how to look after that balance of performance issue.
Jonathan, is there a Moto America test prior to March at Daytona where they can hopefully, start sorting out this balance of performance issue?
From what I know, no. And that's been something that the head of the technical team, Tig, has been trying to get his head wrapped around, because it's going to show up at Daytona, and everybody's going to be there with their best guns, right? And as Darren alluded to earlier, the electronics situation is going to be a big problem, because none of us have a handle on what electronics Ducati is going to bring, or Triumph, or MV Agusta, or anybody else for that matter. And the electronics issues right now are always the stumbling block that everybody has to try to climb over. And it's not easy, to be honest with you, because there's all kinds of things that can be done electronically to enhance the performance of the bike, and also to make it more equitable, if you want to call it that. But like I said, it's going to be an interesting 200, Pat.
Given the unique nature of the track at Daytona and aerodynamics, and you've run in the draft there, just at first glance, and I know there's so much other information and data to look at and go through before we get to Daytona, do you think any of the new bikes that are going to be eligible for that class have an advantage in terms of running the high banks and that very fast back straight?
Looking at the profiles of the bikes, the new R6 has a more slippery fairing than the old one. The Ducati, I haven't really, focused on it. And I don't really think that the aerodynamic situation right now is going to be the biggest hurdle that everybody has to cross. And you asked about the testing, and as I said, no, I don't know of any testing prior to where we can get any answers, but I'm hoping that there will be some information coming out of Europe that will help us, get a handle on that fairly quickly.
Okay, Stuart, I think we've got a couple of more questions.
Yeah, we do, Pat. The next question was, how different is the starting setup of the electronics from track to track? Do you typically have to start each weekend with the same engine, traction control mapping and tweak from there, or is it completely different from round to round?
That's your baby, Darren.
We every track starts differently. So we developed a pretty good routine throughout the year. So beforehand, between races, before the race, we'd go through and review last year's data, last year's maps, look at any differences between the system from year to year. This year we had a system update halfway through the year, so a lot of the stuff from last year wasn't directly applicable, but through using the data we have from the races of this year and going against next year, you can extrapolate and get yourself a starting map for all the different strategies that then you start. But it's always different from the previous races that you've been at. There's always a different starting setup.
Thanks. And then the last one is, do either of you guys have any plans to be doing any racing at the border here in Canada in 2022?
Sorry, Stuart, what was that?
Oh, sorry. Are there any plans for either of you guys to be working with anybody in the CSBK for 2022?
From my side of things, yeah. If I can get an opportunity to be at the races and there's no conflict, for sure I'll go. I always like being there and helping out as much as I can and seeing what kind of talent's coming up and making, reacquainting myself with old friends. And it's really good. And I know that going out to Shubenacadie and being out there with Darren is always fun. That's one of my favorite racetracks to go to. Even, you hear a lot of people complaining about it, but I'm telling you, that it really does provide you with a different way of having to approach going to the races. And it's important to be flexible and be able to learn how to set yourself up and your motorcycle to take advantage of any types of racetracks that you're going to ride on.
Yeah, and for myself, I think there's currently, from what I can gather, there's only going to be one conflict with Moto America. So I'm looking to get to a few races besides the Shubenacadie race myself. So hopefully that works out. See when the schedules get finalized and come out. But my plan would be to go. It's been a few years since I've been to any other nationals other than the AMP. A couple years ago, I was able to get to a couple, but then the schedules now and the travel hasn't been great. So looking forward to be able to get to a couple of other tracks. It'd be great.
Darren, you mentioned prior to us going on, you were out at Atlantic Motorsport Park this past weekend. You guys over the years have produced some great racers, going back to the likes of John Ramsey. I understand you've got a couple of young riders out there that we might be seeing in the national series this year, particularly young John Fraser, who I think is just 16. Was he out on the weekend?
Yeah, we were working with it. Picked up. He had some. He had a R6 last year. He started riding and picking away and doing a lot of track days at the track, just putting in a lot of laps, working on stuff. Helped him out, putting some data on the bike together, getting data stuff there, and then with the help of CORNDOG to update some suspension stuff for the bike. So that was good. And then the plan, he did the Mossport National,
yeah,
and had an up and down weekend, but had some good pace, but tipped over as well. So, but you get to experience that and ride with some really fast guys and see what it takes. So the plan for they want to do the national series next year as well as riding at AMP. So I actually just picked up a 2015 R1 that we're actually going to update the electronics on for 2017, just because it gives some good flexibility. But he's planning on running the R6 and the R1 in the CSBK series next year. And then I think there's a couple other guys East Coast that are interested in doing a few other nationals as well, which would be great to see them get out and go and ride with, you know, more different tracks with some fast guys. You always learn, even at the local national. Everybody always does their fastest laps when the national comes to town, even if that's the only one they ever do, is their own local track. So it's really good for people to go out there and experience that. Just you know, everybody's just focused on going fast and, you know, looking at your lap times and getting the satisfaction in the weekend that you did your fastest time. So it's great. And I'm looking forward to John for sure doing the national. And then we'll see a couple of the fast guys here. One guy had an accident this year and hurt himself, so I'm not sure if he'll be healed up enough to be able to go and do them next year. But there'll be other couple guys, I think, doing the nationals as well, which will be good to see some guys from the East Coast making the trips up there and learning the tracks.
Well, we're looking forward to that CSBK schedule coming out, and for sure, we'll be out at Atlantic Motorsport Park. It's been too long since I've been out there. Jonathan, we sort of got started with the opening round at Road Atlanta. Then I think VIR was the first of many weekends where you guys won both of the races. If the confidence in the program, if you will, was at an all-time low after that Saturday at Road Atlanta, at what point in the season did it peak? Was it when you actually won the championship? I think it was the second race at New Jersey. Those final two rounds were triple headers.
I think from our side in the pit box and the mechanic side and the crew chief and Darin side, we never actually had a moment where I felt like our confidence was peaked. You never know what's going to happen on the racetrack. So you just try to keep everything as level-headed and as calm as possible so that you can react quickly to any sort of issues, as we saw at Brainerd when Jake spun the thing out on the first lap on the third corner. We were able to put that thing back together quite quickly and efficiently for him to actually go out and win the race with a motorcycle that he had just crashed. And we were very fortunate in that event that the Ducati had a moment and went off the racetrack in the next corner after where Jake went down. Otherwise, that string of wins probably would not have occurred uninterrupted. But I don't feel that I ever felt like I had, you know, a peak of confidence during the season. Every weekend was its own entity. And I know that, you know, talking with Darin over the courses of the weekends, trying to stay one step ahead of what we think might be coming down the pipe, looking at track temperatures and what tires are available. And, you know, Jake showed up every weekend ready to go. There was never a question that he was, you know, needed any motivation. That was totally consistent from Atlanta to Barber. And it was very refreshing for me to work with Jake this year, because I realized that I didn't need to do a lot. I didn't have to sit there and try to band-aid something that may be wrong with the bike or with the, you know, with the setup or whatever, because Jake himself was able to go out and ride the motorcycle and take advantage of what it was able to do really well and mitigate those things that maybe weren't quite as good. And like I said, it was quite refreshing, because he would come off a racetrack, and even if we had a session where he wasn't quite the fastest guy, or for whatever reason, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't throwing the toys out of the pram because he wasn't quick. He was just like, okay, so what are we going to do for the next session? Put our heads down, come up with a plan, make some changes. He goes out and rides it and comes back and tells us that's good. You know, I'm happy with that. I know what the bike is going to do, and I'm really, really confident myself. So we don't really need to be trying to, you know, change everything around. because I can do this.
Yeah, indeed. Darren, you mentioned that winning streak could have come to an end at Brainerd. That was a brand new venue for Moto America. How much more challenging is it going to a track like that where you don't have all the data from the previous year to sort of start at? How do you attack a brand new track like Brainerd on the R1?
Well, we were fortunate. We actually had a test after Road America, I believe it was. There was a test after that, so we went there for 2 days. We had 1 day with Jake. He had a little tip over, actually in the same corner as in the race. We learned a little bit from that, which was good. But then we had a good base setting to go back for the race because we had gone and put the time in to do that test after Road America. A few other teams had gone there too, but not everybody did. Which it shows up when you go to the race weekend and you're able to be quick right out of the box because you have all the data from the previous round. We went there, the track was better. We went back there for the race, so there was some adjustments. We always have adjustments to make, looking for the specific conditions. But in that particular case, we had data to go to. So it wasn't like we just showed up on the Friday and had to start from scratch. So we were fortunate in that aspect.
Indeed. Again, if you've got any questions for Jonathan Cornwell or Darin Marshall about their 2021 season, or maybe even looking ahead, we've touched the possibility of their entry in the Daytona 200 with Jake Gagne, but looking ahead to 2022, Jonathan and Darin, are your deals finalized as yet for next year? Are you working towards those? Because other than going 20 for 20, I don't know how much more you guys can do as a team, rider, mechanics, crew to improve a whole lot in what you accomplished this year.
Well, I don't know. You just, no matter what, you just look at trying to improve your lap times. Doesn't matter, just go out there and say, well, last year, here's how fast we went. This year, we'll just go faster, right? And even if you won 20 to 20, how would you get? Well, you just do that 20 to 20 and go faster. Not that we're going to do 20 to 20, but you know what I mean, right? So it's if you use the lap times and your race time totals as your goalposts and try to move those, then you always have a constant challenge to achieve there to try to apply.
Jonathan, what about you?
I agree 100% with Darin, and I think that we've talked about this before because last year it started to get a little bit monotonous, and we actually used the lap times from Cam as our goalposts because Cam was really, really, really efficient and quick the year before. So, I know that Jake was looking at those, and those were his benchmarks, and he always wanted to do better than what Cam did the year before. Arguably, the package that we had this year was, I'm not going to say better, but I'm going to say it was at least as good as what Cam had last year. We had the same configuration of motor, and yes, we had some updates on the electronic side of things, but mostly the electronics changes that were made were more in line with trying to preserve the tire life, make the bike so that it was more consistent over the course of a race, rather than just outright speed in one lap. Anybody can pick their brain out and put it in the toolbox and do a fast lap, just one lap. It's, trying to put the package together so that you can actually do those lap times when the tires go off at the end of the race, when you're starting to, feel like you're getting a little bit weary and tired and overheated. And that's why one of the things that I really appreciated this year with Jake was knowing that he would show up at the races. He was fit, he was motivated, and we were always looking at how we were going to improve. But our benchmark was the lap times, not the competition so much.
Yeah, I know we've got a bunch of questions in the Q&A we're going to get to, but Jonathan, as you look back on the season, if Cam Beaubier's times from 2020 were sort of the benchmark, how often was Jake either matching or improving on those lap times?
I can't remember, Darren, but I think it was only what, 3 races that we weren't as fast as
Yeah.
Cam.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and,
wanted, yeah, well, yeah, Barber being one of the weekends, but the conditions there. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, there was, I think, 2 other tracks that we weren't able to get to better that.
And
Stuart?
I will,
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Pat.
No, I said, go ahead, and then we'll get to the questions that are in the Q&A.
So part of the thing is that you have to start to categorize, and this is something that even at the regional level, it's really important. You need to be able to keep track of the conditions of the asphalt and also what kind of tire selections that you have during the course of that weekend and what you're going to be able to make the most of. So, for example, at Laguna, the lap record is still held by Josh Heron from 2018, I think. And we weren't that close. And even Cam the year before wasn't that close. So you kind of go, well, why? You know, what is it? We think we have a better bike, a better setup. And then talking to the Dunlop technicians and so on about, you know, what happened over the course of the weekend, you try to get some insight and, you know, what it is that you need to do to try to improve, not just from your side, but how are we going to improve with the tire side? Because that's also a big part of the equation. And at Laguna, for example, the track didn't have quite as much grip as the year before, even though the year before was held in late October, I think. For whatever reason, they had good grip that year, and this year for us, we were struggling. So it's important to, you know, make sure that you keep track of the variables that you don't have any control over, weather being one, and also what kind of selections that you have with the tires, and are you going to be able to make use of what you have there to be able to go faster or not.
Stuart, let's get to those questions in the Q&A for Darren and Jonathan.
Okay, thanks, Pat. The first question would be, I guess, for either guy is, what is the biggest difference between Cam Beaubier and Jake Gagne?
I'll have to answer that because Darren didn't have much input with Cam last year, and I did. The biggest difference is the smoothness, is the consistency. Cam is very good at being able to place the bike in the right place on the racetrack every single lap. And because he's able to do that so consistently, it results in him being able to chip away at his times really easily. Jake emulated Cam this year. He did the same sorts of things that Cam was doing the year previously. And I don't think that Jake had the opportunity in 2020. There was a lot of different factors that entered into that, but I know that this year his approach to coming to the races and doing his practice sessions were to improve his smoothness and consistency lap in, lap out. But even now, Pat asked earlier about Cameron's improvements in the MotoGP and Moto2, and yes, he is improving very much because he's starting to believe he can feel what's happening with the tires. It's been a long year for him because those front tires on the Dunlop front is really alien to him. It didn't give him the kind of feedback he was looking for, so he was never sure where the limit was. And speaking to him at Laguna, he said that was sort of the area that he was trying to improve on, and they were working really hard on trying to find him a chassis setup that was going to allow him to push it up against the limit but not lose the front and crash. He'd be able to recover when it started to slide, but those front tires for that Moto2 class were they're not as good as they used to be, let's put it that way.
Thanks. And then the next question is, you know, Tony Elias came in and filled in for Josh Heron for part of the season. Is there any potential possibility that Yamaha would field a third Superbike riders are just not any kind of budget for that.
Again, that's probably a question that I can answer, and I don't think that that's going to happen. There's no benefit from having Tony ride our bike. It was good to have him there. We got a lot of information. It was interesting to hear what he had to say about the configuration of the bike and how it worked, and comparing it to the Suzukis that he's ridden, and also to every other motorcycle that he's ridden, because he's not shy about sharing his experiences and what is good and what is bad. But as far as putting him on the bike for the whole season, I'm not sure that that's going to be a viable alternative for a second rider.
And then the final point here, Pat, I'll just point out to both guys, is that congratulations, you guys had a great year. And it was clear from the TV coverage that each time Jake went out, he was focused and the bike was prepped, that he had the best possible weapon and opportunity to achieve a win. Looking forward to seeing you guys in 2022, and hope to be able to get across the border to see you guys at the Ridge. So this is somebody clearly from the west coast of Canada, but I don't have a name.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all interesting. Today is the date that Canadians can get in their vehicle and cross the border and go to a race. And right now, I think when you come back, you need to have a negative COVID test. But I'm hearing word that maybe by early January, you just need to show that you're double vaccinated, and you'll be able to get across the border. Jonathan, at that last event, and Darren, you as well, you mentioned you were finally able to travel and get to New Jersey, where you guys wrapped up the championship, and then on to Barber. And we had Rick Hobbs on last week, and he talked about how difficult the weather conditions were. When you run into a situation with weather like you had at Barber, where it was torrential downpours, partly wet in other sessions, and then I don't know if it ever really got dry for any of the sessions there. How challenging is that, and what do you have to do in terms of setup and looking at your data to give your rider a bike that he can go out there and be confident in pushing as hard as he can?
Go ahead, Darren.
From the electronic standpoint, again, we were fortunate. One of our tests at the beginning of the year was wet. We were out in Buttonwillow doing some testing, so I was fortunate to be able to have a little bit of wet weather data for the bike. With for me to have that, I was familiar with actually working with the bike at the time, as opposed to previous year data. But even previous year, I think we talked about the Barber. It's been a couple of years since there was actually a rain race. So for us, we had something that we could go over before the race and then have for the first session. And then I personally, I'm not worried about rain. I enjoy it. It's a good challenge. It makes you think, and generally have a pretty good approach for how we tackle the rain. For me, Barber was really good in the fact that we had really 3 different conditions for the different races. We had one that was torrential, one that was drying, and then one that was wet. So it was interesting. A little bit of overcompensation in the second race where it was drying, and some of the strategies that we have some good tools in the toolbox. But in that particular case, one of them was a little bit too active for us, so it didn't give Jake what he needed to be able to, to go to the front with the top guys. And then, but the other 2 races were really good, and really satisfying from a team trying to collaborate, get a good setting for the physical nature of the bike, as well as the electronics, that he could go and be fully confident to ride the bike the way he wanted to ride it, and have the trust he has in that he has in the dry. So it was I really enjoyed the weekend. It was soggy, but I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah. And Jonathan,
Same here.
Yeah.
Same here for me as well. I asked Jake when we knew that it was going to be a potential for a super wet weekend. I said to him, I said, "You're pretty good in the wet. You like it, don't you?" because I had seen him in previous races and when we had wet races. He said, yeah, he says, it's fun. He says, you know, I like it because a lot of other people don't. So, you know, that gives me a little bit of a leg up as far as my confidence. And I've had quite a bit of experience, you know, setting motorcycles up for rain. So, you know, I had spoken to him prior to the first session in the wet. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do, you know, as far as the wet setup. And Darin collaborated with the electronic side, but I made the chassis a little bit more user-friendly so that it would be a lot less prone to doing things unexpected, because that's the thing that you try to avoid, is having a motorcycle that does something unexpected. If that happens, then the rider becomes less willing to try to ride up to the limit. So you're always working and pushing to try to make a motorcycle that's confidence inspiring, easy to ride. It may not be the knife edge that you would do in the dry, but that's okay, because in the wet, the rider makes up, you know, probably 90% of what is going to be achievable on the racetrack.
So at that very last Superbike race at Barber, because as I said, New Jersey and Barber were triple headers. I think at that point, Jake was tied with Josh Hayes and Cam Beaubier for most Superbike wins in a season at 16. How important was it on that last Superbike race to break the record and beat those two guys with his 17th Superbike win? And was that something that that you guys were focused on in that last race, or it really wasn't a factor?
Did we even talk about that, Darin?
No, I was just going to say, we throughout the whole year, I mean, that was always, it came up as questions. We never spoke about it. We, you know, from the beginning of the year, we sat together and came up with, here's how we want to approach every race weekend. And we really stuck to that script from before the race preparation, between, you know, CORNDOG and Jake and myself going through what we want to do, talking with Richard, how we want to approach the weekend, every race weekend. We stuck with that rhythm. And the last race, it was like, no, we're just going to do all the things that we, you know we need to do, have the clarity to know that we can do this job. We just got to put our heads together. We've done everything we can do. There's no reason you can't go win this race. You go and you do the lap times, the wins will come. You go in and do the wins, the records will come. So it was pretty straightforward.
So from my perspective, I think I agree with everything that Darin was saying, because it's really important to understand that we never focused on the actual overall win totals.
No.
The only thing that we were focused on was the individual race per weekend, and actually the individual session. Don't look too far down the road, because it's not really that important. What's important is what's right in front of you, and making sure that you take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves at that moment. It's like Carl Fogarty said a long time ago that I'm just going to win all the races. The points will take care of themselves. And I think somewhere along the lines at the beginning of the season, Jake actually alluded to that. He said that, you know, I'm not going to worry about, you know, the title or anything like that. I just want to win races. I just want to go out, ride, have fun. And that word fun was something that I hadn't heard from a rider in a long time. And he was actually approaching every weekend to make sure that he had fun. And you could tell when he had fun, because those were the races where he was out front by a long way.
So Jonathan, at the end of that Barber weekend, or maybe it was the day after, was there a team meeting where you and Darin and Richard Stromboli and Jake Gagne and the rest of the crew all got together to sort of look back and I don't know, get a sense of what collectively you guys had accomplished in 2021?
Nope. It never happened. We went to the awards banquet and we talked about, you know, all kinds of things, but looking back at the collective wins and the accomplishments, they're never like that. It's looking forward. What are we going to do for next year? And the thought process for us at the end of the season was, we want to do a World Superbike race. how can we put together a deal to do a World Superbike race? We wanted to go to Argentina. That was something that we had talked about. We were trying to put that in place to make that happen. It's, you know, it's not, it's what happens behind you, what, you know, the results, those are only the building blocks to get to the next level. And so the next level for us is, you know, looking at 2022, and then also what can we do so that we can, you know, at least try to do a wild card or two in a World Superbike race.
Yeah, any thoughts in terms of where that race would be?
I'm sorry, any thoughts in terms of what?
Yeah, if you are going to do a World Superbike race, which racetrack would that be? What country?
We were looking at Argentina probably because it's the easiest one, you know, it's probably the easiest one for us to get down to. And it's at the end of the season. So we'd be finished our season and we could go and do that one. We had looked at maybe going to Malaysia or no, Indonesia this year. We, you know, kind of threw that out on the table, Richard and I, to Jake. And Jake said that that was not going to be possible. He needs to take care of some surgery as far as removing some metal in his ankle and his leg. And then that was going to happen on November 8th. So that was going to rule that out for us. But he was all on board for trying to do a World Superbike race, just not that one.
All right. And then how do you, Jonathan and Darren, spend the next couple of months before you get back at it 100% full time, whether that's preparing for the Daytona 200 or the opening round of Moto America Superbike?
Well, we had a test a week and a half ago with Dunlop, testing some tires for them, and you know, it's a continual evolution of, you know, refining our processes and refining how we utilize, from my standpoint at least, the tools and the tool sets for updating electronics and monitoring what's going on there with all the data stuff. So there's a few things there to update with respect to how we gather data and analyze it. And then talking with Richard and CORNDOG, some additional things we may want to do on the bike for monitoring different things. And then, you know, for the 200, just going through and, you know, the kit stuff has a fair amount of adjustability in it. So just getting a little bit familiar with that and talking about just the overall strategies for, you know, the 600 for the Daytona race, right? There's, you know, a lot goes into it. There's a lot goes into the strategy, lots of discussions there. And then there'll be some testing coming up, certainly in the new year, potentially before, but for sure in the new year, we'll have a few test events, just working through those, what they'll be. So it's really, it's full time with, you know, from my, you know, myself, you know, and CORNDOG, working with Richard, you know, I can do a lot of my stuff while I do all of it through the wintertime remotely. You know, I just access into the shop and get access to everything I need there. And then we have a couple tests coming up, like I talked about, and CORNDOG will be working on the stuff for the 600, and then getting ready for what we're going to have for updates on the hard parts for next year.
Indeed. Jonathan, doesn't sound like you've got much of an off season.
No,
not really. So I get a little bit of time here in November, and then the beginning of December, I got to run back to LA and start working on getting some 600s prepared and look at what we're going to do for the super bikes. We have a couple of plans as far as updating some hard parts, swing arms, and some linkages and stuff like that. And we also have a new shock absorber that we tested at Button Willow that we're not 100% sure that it's, you know, we haven't maximized the potential with it, but you know, that's all part and parcel of the preseason, and just put your head down and keep moving forward.
Indeed. Stuart, I think we've got a couple of final questions before we wrap up tonight's show.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. This has been great listening to both John and Darren. Very enlightening how the race teams work and so on. But actually, the question was from Stu Shaw, who was also the anonymous person before. I didn't have the name, and I know Jonathan knows him for sure. Is how soon will it be before we hear about rider and team lineups for 2022 in Moto America?
How soon will it be? What? Sorry?
Before we hear, like, when will the rider lineups and so forth be announced for 2022, if it's not already been confirmed?
From what I can say, that Jake is for sure going to be back, and the second rider for Yamaha, at least, I think you probably won't hear anything about that until sometime in the middle of December.
Thanks. And then the one last comment was, how would you guys suggest, or what would your opinion be for anybody that does have a technical background wanting to work in one of the race teams, whether it be in CSBK or Moto America? How do you get involved in working with one of these teams?
You find somebody that needs help and offer to help them. You know, it's like, you know, you do your apprenticeship and just go in. If you have some skills to apply, you go there, and just same as what riders do. You look at what Garrett Gerloff did a couple years ago. He went to a World Superbike race. So there, not, a little different what you want to do at the track, but the same type of thing. So if you have an interest, just get out there and you can walk around. You can find guys that you watch them on the track. You can see something that you like the way they ride or like the way they're doing something. You look around, you find they have themselves and their wife, their girlfriend, their dog or something helping them out, and that's it. And say, they might be able to use some help. And you start to get involved in it. And then if you people watch and they see what happens, if they, in my opinion, if they see that somebody's doing a good job there and they're looking for somebody on the team, then you have an opportunity to progress up through and potentially work on a better funded team that has access to more parts, components, electronics, or things that can actually affect a change on the motorcycle. And you just keep advancing that way. In my opinion, just start from there. Don't expect to just jump in, on the biggest truck in the paddock necessarily, right? But you can certainly always find somebody to help and build your skills. And if you're good at what you do, you'll end up with a lot of opportunity to have a really rewarding time in the motorcycle industry.
Jonathan, you've just about done it all. What's your advice for somebody looking to get in on the technical?
I agree with Darin, and it's really important to know that people are watching. Everybody is always looking around to see who's doing what, and you get noticed by doing good work and being there, showing up, having a good attitude. Sometimes you're going to take somebody that may not be the most spectacular mechanic or crew person, just because they fit into your organization a lot better. So that's a big part of it, is having enthusiasm. It doesn't matter what happens. You can't be a crybaby. You just have to put your head down. Everybody's working together to pull on the rope in the same direction. And it's really important that you understand that there are going to be bad days, and those bad days are probably not going to be offset by the good days that you have. But so what? You're doing something that you love, and there's a lot of people out there that want to do stuff like that. And it's like, they're just trying to find a way in. Indeed.
So that is going to wrap up this edition of Track Announcers Notebook. Jonathan Cornwell, Darin Marshall, I want to thank you for spending some time with us tonight to talk about your amazing 2021 season with Jake Gagne and Richard Stromboli. Want to thank you for coming on, and congratulations on a great season. Look forward to catching up with you at Daytona in March, and look forward to hearing all of the news about that Daytona 200 ride for Jake Gagne. Should be great.
Yep. Hopefully it all comes together.
Stuart?
Thanks, Stuart and Pat, for putting us together in your 18 months of doing this. It's a pleasure that I was able to be on it with you.
Yeah, well, it's all Stuart's fault. Stuart?